Alright, so for this session, what I'm going to focus on is setting up the basic minimal requirements just to have a running phaser project, and then how you can test to make sure that it is in fact actually running. Before we get into that, a couple things that you'll need to have is Visual Studio Code would be the best way, or you can use that Replit or Repellet, however you say it, account. repl.it is the website. Whichever way you go, this is going to be the structure for our project. You're going to want to create an assets folder, and over on the Discord, if you go into the live workshop chat, you can pull up the chat by clicking right there on that little icon. There is an assets.zip. You need to download that file and then extract the contents of the zip into an assets folder, and it should already be separated out into images and sounds. We're going to need that because we want to keep track of all of the images and sound effects that will be in the game. Basically, these are going to be the balloons that pop, which our target is going to be something along the lines of this. We're going to have a title screen. We click to start. Clouds are going to go by. Balloons come up. We click the balloons and pop them. That will add to our score. There's a timer that counts down, and when the timer runs out, it's going to congratulate us and tell us how awesome we did and how many points we got. So to get that started, you're going to want to put all those assets in the assets folder. You're going to need an index.html. This is the actual website code, because this project, at the end of the day, is a website. That is what it is. It's just an interactive one. You're going to have our main.js that contains the configuration for the game. You're going to load phaser.js, which is the library for the game. And on the phaser.js, I'm going to drop phaser in there real quick. So that is the copy of phaser.js. That's going to be the library that we use that runs all of the game stuff, makes our lives easy. And then preload is going to be the first scene from phaser that we run, just to test and make sure our project is working. So get that set up in Visual Studio Code. The other thing you'll need to do once this is good is we are going to go into your extensions, and you want to make sure that this live server extension is installed. This is the author. You can see it has like 53 million downloads. That is what will actually allow you to run your website, launch the project, and not have to code your own web server. So that is everything necessary for the development environment. Let's go ahead and get into the code. So first thing we're going to do is create the index.html. And this is just going to be the bare bones minimum website that we need to have to run phaser. If you're completely unfamiliar with it, the syntax for it is in what's called tags. So this HTML tag right here opens with this less than sign, ends with a greater than sign, and just tells the browser, hey, this document is an HTML document. And at the end of the HTML tag, you have to put a slash and then repeat the less than, greater than signs. Inside of the HTML tag, we're going to put our header. The header is going to contain information like the title, what fonts we're going to use. Inside of the header, we're also going to put our styling, and we just want to set our canvas width and height. Canvas is an element of the website that will contain the phaser game. You can change the background color to anything that you would like. I've got mine set to black, but you can enter different values here, red, green, blue, or just click and it'll change the color for you. That's the end of the style tag, end of the header tag, and then the body of our HTML is simply going to load all of the scripts that we're going to be using. So, we also contain the canvas, and we're going to give it an ID of game, because later on in our configuration, it's going to make sure to attach the ID of game to be the canvas we use and not create a second canvas. We're going to load the script phaser.js, so we have a script tag, and then our source is phaser.js. That just tells it what file it needs to load. It'll load that and then move on to our preload file. and then we're going to load our main configuration. The only issue that I've ever really had with this is since preload is going to be a scene in the phaser project, main keeps track of all the scene data, so it has to be loaded after all of the scenes are loaded. We wrap up the body, we wrap up the HTML, and that is it for the index.html document. So I'm going to zoom in here where you can see it better. And if you need to, go ahead and just write all of this code into your own index.html document. Save or pause the video so that you've got time to do your work. And when you're done, move on. We are going to write up the configuration in main.js. Okay, so main.js contains the configuration for our phaser game. We're going to use config as our variable, and notice that the syntax here is a lot different. This is broken up into objects. HTML uses tags. We're not going to be doing that in JavaScript. JavaScript is going to be more brackets and parentheses. So objects are broken up into brackets. You then declare what the name of your property is. In this case, it's going to be the type of canvas we want. We're going to let Phaser just handle it. We're going to tell it what width we want our game to be, 1600 pixels, comma, after all of these. That separates a property from the next one in the object. We're going to give it a height. We're going to tell it what scenes we are ready for. Right now, we only have preload scene, so that should be the only thing in this array. Now, an array is just like an object. It's just another variable, but instead of containing individual properties, you can have different entries in the array. So preload scene is going to be scene 0 on the list. I could add menu, play, game over, win scene, credits, all those, and it would keep track of those. But these would be, and these would be objects of their own right. But as far as this array is concerned, they just need to have the names. And then whatever preload scene is will be at scene 0. Whatever menu scene is will be at scene 1. Pixel art, we're going to set to false because the assets that we're using are going to be vector art. Scale, we want to have Phaser use the scale manager, set it to fit our screen. We're going to put everything centered horizontal, set another background color. In this case, mine is going to be blue because I want to have kind of a sky for the background on the canvas. That will save me from having to actually put a sky in myself. We're going to be using the arcade physics engine. So we pass it the physics object, we configure the physics. Arcade, we want a Y gravity of about 1000. This debug being true, we can turn this comment off later if we need to, and that'll bring up all of our hitboxes for our objects in the game. And then we just need to close the configuration. When you go to type this up, one thing that I found is really helpful, anytime you write an opening bracket, put the closing bracket there as well. Because what has happened before is you'll go in and you're coding along and you write this line per line just how it is, and then when you go to test it, it doesn't work because this bracket that you need way down at the end of the file you haven't put in yet because you got there. So anytime that you enter a bracket, it's a good idea to go ahead and put the closing bracket into and then just put the rest of your object inside of it. Just bracket, open, close, enter, and go. That way you don't have to worry about remembering to close off all of your objects. At the end of the configuration file, we're going to say let game equal new phaser.game. We pass it the configuration object, and that's it for config. That will launch our game, create a canvas, and put our scene into it. So go ahead and copy the configuration over. Again, this is going in main.js. We will add more to it later, but for now, this is all we need to get going. And now we're going to do preload.js. So preload, its purpose is to load all of the assets that we are going to be working with. So we've got our balloon file that we need to open. We've got the frame data for the balloons that we need to open. We've got sound effects that we need to load so that we can play sounds. And preload is going to take care of all of that. So the first thing that we're going to do is create a new class. We're going to call the class preload scene, and it is going to extend phaser.scene. Phaser itself, in this 100,000 line code project, contains a scene object, and by extending it, we're just basically saying we want to pull scene from phaser, and then we're going to manipulate it a little bit. We're going to make it our own. So we create an extension of phaser.scene, open and close our bracket, and then we're going to run a constructor. If we're doing a new class, usually we have to have a constructor with it. Super is going to run phaser's version of scene and assign it this key here, preload. When we go to launch scenes later on, we're going to be assigning them keys. This is user defined. You can call it whatever you want to. I just think preload fits because we are creating our preload scene. And so then whenever phaser needs to know what scene to run, these keys are going to be there to launch them. After our constructor, we are going to create an init function. Not infinity, init. Since it's a function, we're going to put parentheses, and then we're going to put empty brackets. We can pass properties, variables inside of that if we want to. Inside of the bracket part, that's where the function is going to run linearly. So we type whatever we want. On line 9, it will run that, then it will run line 10, run line 11, until it hits the end of the function. And all that we are going to do right now is test and see if our preload function is actually working. So to do that, we've got two different ways. The first one, you can type console.log, and then we're just going to say, in quotes, preload scene works. And so now when I run this, assuming everything is set up properly, we can right click, open with live server, and our browser will open up. I can right click and go to inspect, or hit Control-Shift-I if you like keyboard shortcuts, and that will take me to my console. And you can see here it is saying preload scene is not defined on line 6, which means I have an issue. And there it is. So in main, I put preload scene with a lowercase p, and in the class I had a capital P. So that's why it can't find preload scene. So I just need to change this to make it match. And now we can see that my console log from preload is in the dev console. It says right there, preload scene works. This is coming from preload.js line 10. If I look at line 10, that is my console log. Your other option is you can do an alert, and what an alert does is it will create a pop-up. And you can test that way if that's easier for you. So once that is up and running, the next thing to do is to actually load the assets. So we're going to create a preload function, and we're going to go ahead, let's make our create function, and I'll go over what those do. So these are specific things that Phaser will run in order. Init is just short for initialization, and in here, usually if you're passing data from one scene to the other, like you have finished the game and you want to tell the high score scene what the score is, you can pass your score data there. That's usually what initialization is used for, or just for testing if your scene actually works. Preload is where all of your assets are going to be loaded. You can load assets in other functions, but you have to manually start the loader, and that's going to just be beyond the scope of this workshop. And then create is going to be where you actually put things on screen. That's what create is for. You set variables, you put sprites and images on the screen, you set up all of your animations. That'll go in create. So init, preload, create, each run one time. The other one that we need to know about is update. And update is a loop, which means that whatever you throw in it is going to run linearly from top to bottom every single CPU cycle. It will just go over and over and over and over and over. That's what a loop is. All right, so what do we need to do in preload? We need to make sure that we have loaded the assets that are in this folder. And so we've got a couple of them. The first one is going to be our pop sound. So to load a sound, we're going to say this.load.audio. This is a keyword in JavaScript that just means what is the context that I'm talking about. In this case, this represents the scene. And so we want to say this.load, not preload, this.load.audio. And what that's going to do is run the audio function that the load plugin of the scene has. And then we need to pass the audio a configuration. So we're going to just say balloon pop is the name of the sound. You can call it pop, whatever you want to. Again, just remember what it is. We're going to use this key that we're assigning later to actually play the sound effect. And then we're going to load it from assets/pop.wave. That is referencing the actual audio file. And then what that does is it takes that sound, stores it in memory, and assigns it this key so that later on when I want to play it, I can just say I need to play the sound balloon pop, and Phaser will know what sound that is. Next thing that we need to do is load our balloons. Now the balloons are set up in what's called an atlas. And atlases are really nice because you can have multiple images but one load call. You don't have to load each individual frame. They come with JSON data, and what this does is it says what frame is where. So this is the name of a frame. It is located at this X and this Y location on the image, and then it will put a square that is this many pixels wide, this many pixels high, to define this shape as a balloon. That's all of your frame data. And we can do all of this by running a load on an atlas. So we're going to say this.load.atlas. We're going to give this one a key. Let's call it balloons. Would be a good name. And then it is going to be located in assets/balloons.png. And we have assets/balloons.json. We're going to pass it the name of the image file, and we're going to pass it the data for the frames of this image. And that takes care of loading our assets. Our balloons are loaded. Our pop is loaded. We're good to go. When I go and run a console.log on this.textures, that's the texture manager. It keeps track of all of the images that we've loaded. We can run this log. Oh, and we're getting a 404. Assets/balloons.png is not there because it is inside of an images folder. Assets/images/balloons.png. Same thing for the JSON file. It's in a subfolder. And now we can see that inside of our textures, we have the balloons texture loaded. And it contains all of the following frames: balloon 1, 2, 3, 4, balloon explode. For the animation, there's all the frames of the exploding animation, and all the different strings are there. And again, this is all just data about that image file and where each frame is located so that Phaser knows what to display on the screen. And that's it for the preload scene. So take your time, copy this over, and that ends module number 1. Next time we get together, we are going to go in and create the actual title scene and probably the gameplay scene set up where we can interact with objects on the screen, get a scene to start on click, and actually begin working on a functioning game. If you have questions, again, contact me on the Discord. I don't mind at all if you get a hold of me on there with questions. That's why I set it up. You can leave me a message over here in general. You can leave one on questions if you want to there. I'll just kind of treat this as the official For Me Questions channel. And again, anything that we talked about or typed up during the actual live workshop is going to be on record over here in the chat. So as I add files or anything to it, I'm just going to drop those off on the live workshop chat. Feel free to hop over and download all of the files that you need. Thanks again for attending, and that's going to conclude session 1. One thing that I left out from the session was that we added a loading box to the game. I'm going to go ahead and go over how to create that. If you have not done much gaming yourself, a loading bar is simply this. It's a bar that progresses as the game loads so that the player knows, hey, it didn't lock up, it's actually still running. I didn't think about it. The game that we're working on loads so quick that you're not probably going to see it, honestly, when you go to load your assets. But it's a really, really nice, easy way to teach some of the event stuff. So consider the rest of this as an optional lesson. But if you want to include it or be able to teach it to your students how to use Phaser to create a loading screen, this is a real easy one. It's straight out of a course that I took myself. And without any more talking, I'm just going to go ahead and get right into how it works. So it's going to go inside of the preload function, but before we actually load our assets, because Phaser is going to know how many assets it needs to load. These add it all to a queue, and then when there's nothing else added to the queue, it starts actually running through the assets and loading them. So we're going to create a progress bar that's going to be a graphics. Again, that's just a Phaser game object that allows you to draw to the screen. We're going to create a progress box that is the same thing. We're going to set the fill style. Again, these are the colors and alpha that I like. If you want to use something else, you can. Then we're going to fill a rectangle, and that's going to be the X and Y coordinates, followed by the width and height for that. Then we are going to set the location, the Y and the X value to be equal to half of our screen length. We pull the configuration width and the configuration height, divide by 2, and that will put our loading box dead center of the screen. Then we're going to tell the loader, hey, on the progress event, which is something, again, just built into Phaser, whenever the progress event fires, we need to clear the progress bar. We're going to reset the fill style, and then we're going to fill the rectangle, but we're going to use the value of our progress, and that's going to fill that rectangle in from left to right, which is what causes the visual effect of it growing as more loading is done. This line is just here to check it. As things progress, you'll see things logged into the dev console, and then when it is complete, the progress bar is going to destroy itself. We pass a little bit of configuration here to create a text box. This is a text object that's going to actually display while all of this is happening. So the loading text is going to be located with this X and Y coordinate. The text, what you put here, is what it will actually say, and then you can change the font size, which font you use, and the color by changing your fill value. Set origin just tells it that, hey, the center of this, because it's going to put what you consider the origin at the X and Y location. This puts it halfway across and halfway down, so dead center of the image is the origin for our text. And then our loading begins after that. So if I went through that too quick, I'm going to leave this up here for a bit. Just feel free to pause. I'm going to scroll down for the second half. When you're ready for that, resume the video and you'll see that show up. And you can add your loading screen to your project. So this is part 1 of the loading screen. And this is the second part of the loading screen, starting at line 30 on down. Hope that works for you. Again, if you've got questions, please let me know.